Welcome everybody. Zach Kortz here with RevZilla, and this is another episode of Daily Rider where we learn about bikes as we ride. Our guest today is Ducati's Street Fighter V2. That is just about a 1000cc Ducati twin with a full suite of electronics, a flat handlebar, and an MSRP of $18,000. The brochure says it's a Panigale V2 with no bodywork. In reality, that's actually pretty much exactly what it is. So on the ride to work today, we will talk about the differences between the Street Fighter and the Panigale, as well as the pros and cons of a true naked sport bike as a daily rider. I think I'm ready. Ready? Let's go, everybody. Okie dokie, everybody. Before we get going here, a friendly reminder. This episode of Daily Rider is brought to you by our friends at Rever. Rever is a mobile app that allows you to track any type of ride and then share ride information and photos with your friends and an online riding community. You can download it for free at your app store, or for more information, go to rever.co. Okie dokie, everybody. Ducati Street Fighter V2. Where do we start? Usually with the engine, but I'm going to start somewhere else just to switch it up here. The branding is very subtle, you know? Street Fighter V2, like down in this sort of like small, like size 14 font or whatever on the lower fairing. It does have some pretty obvious differentiators from the Street Fighter V4, the most notable of which being the wings, and the exhaust is also a little different. But yeah, I kind of like that the branding's subtle, and I like that the color is simple. I've always liked that about Ducatis, that it's just sort of like, it's red, and there's not a lot of graphics and hoo-ha going on. So underneath what appears to be actually quite a lot of bodywork for a quote-unquote naked bike is a 955cc Super Quadro V-twin. And this is the same engine from the Panigale V2, not to be confused with the similarly sized engine that's in the Monster, the Desert X, the Hypermotard, and Multistrada V2. So we'll start off there with a little differentiation, I suppose. The most obvious difference between the Street Fighter V2 and the Panigale V2, of course, is no fairing, right? It's a fork-mounted headlight situation and the flat handlebar. But there are a couple of other small differentiators as well. There are slightly less aggressive brake pads in the braking system, though the brake system is largely the same. The swing arm is 0.6 inches longer on the Street Fighter V2, and the seat is wider and flatter and thicker than the Panigale V2 for enhanced comfort, we hope. And this seat has rain on it. Because it just started raining, we're going to hope to dodge most of the weather here. Being daily riders that we are, I didn't think that a little bit of rain was going to slow us down, so let's hope it doesn't. So yeah, without further ado, I suppose we can get going. Oh, I did want to mention a couple things to keep in mind later on when I cannot point them out. One of them being this big loop of exhaust that sticks out underneath the Street Fighter V2's seat. That's a bit of a Ducati trademark, but I wanted to sort of point out they got this big heat shield here for obvious reasons. And then the passenger foot pegs, which are quite high, as you can see. Yeah, aside from that, instead of sitting in the rain, let's ride in the rain, shall we? We'll spark up this 4.3-inch TFT and fire up this engine. Bit of a high idle because it's a little cold, but also it's a fairly high performance engine in there. Again, different from the more street-oriented Ducati models that have a similar sized engine. This Super Quadro one is very over square. The same stroke, I believe, as the 1299 or 1199 Panigale. It's very short stroke, but a much smaller bore, obviously, because the engine size in total is smaller, but it's still very aggressive. It's a 100mm bore and a 60mm stroke, so it's very over square, which means it's got a bit of rush of power up top, and yeah, it's a little bit more just kind of aggressive in general. Ready for a street fight, you might say. Let's ride to work, shall we? Maybe be able to experiment with electronics a little bit more than usual. What with the water falling from the sky, I got my waterproof gear on. I think I'm ready to go. Let's do it, kiddos. Don't hit the mail person. Basic specs on the Street Fighter V2. Like I said, $18,000 and a 955cc twin that cranks out a claimed 153 horsepower, I believe, in 74.8 foot-pounds of torque. As usual, specs are listed in the description of this video. It's down a little bit of horsepower on the Panigale V2 because it has been retuned for street use. The final drive gearing is a little bit lower, and there's a slightly different tune in the fueling, I believe. Anyway, a little bit less power than the Panigale V2, but not in a way that really is going to affect your daily ride. Interestingly, the seat height is listed at 33.3 inches, which is fairly tall. It is a tall bike, not meant for the faint of heart. What I think is interesting about it is that the Panigale V2 that I tested a couple years ago, the seat height is listed at 33.1 inches, which is a couple tenths lower than this bike. Oh, hey, pulling off to the side of the road there, freaking me out. So yeah, it's sort of rare that you'd see the more street-oriented bike have a taller seat height, but it could be because the seat is thicker, I suppose, which any of us street riders can appreciate, I think. 4.5 gallons of gas in the tank, and when the tank was full, oh my gosh, I don't remember. Can you believe it? I don't remember what the measured weight was. I know the claimed weight is 441. Measured weight is on screen right now. Anyway, the weight's not really a marquee number for the Street Fighter V2. Mid 400s, which is fairly typical for a bike of this size, though lighter than lots of other bikes that claim 150 horsepower. So credit to Ducati there. As for general ergonomics, it's definitely a very sporty riding position, especially the seat to foot peg distance. There's like, you know, there's not a ton of leg room because it's a sporty bike, it's meant to lean over, but the reach to the handlebars is quite reasonable, I think. You do sort of crouch forward a little bit, but I find the distance from the seat to the handlebar to be quite reasonable, short even. So if I scoot to the front of the seat, I can be fairly upright, though at that point the foot pegs feel pretty far back. It is undeniably a sporty riding position. It is undeniably a sport bike, but in general, quite comfortable. I like the handlebar width and height. I feel like I'm in command, and the seat is surprisingly good. Just very, very wide and thick and comfortable. I don't know. I did not expect it to be so accommodating. All right, now they're going a little bit faster. We can talk about freeway manners, and you can probably pretty much guess what I'm going to say, which is that it's not hugely comfortable on account of the tight leg room, but that nice thick seat makes it pretty decent place to sit. And one of the things I like about the seat is it's fairly flat, so you can scoot back if you like to and lean into the wind. If you're going faster, you can scoot forward and be a little bit more upright. And of all the highway miles I've logged on this bike, I have not done a full, you know, day at 75 miles an hour on the freeway or anything, but quite good, really. I kind of like the pulse and vibration that comes through the foot pegs and handlebar. It feels sort of noticeable but appropriate for what the bike is. It's easy to assume that bikes like the Ducati Street Fighter are just going to be kind of harsh and difficult in any street situation, and maybe those expectations are just being defied when I ride the bike around, but it's very reasonable. I think I probably said the same thing about the Street Fighter V4 back when I did that on Daily Rider, but if you've ever ridden Street Fighters of years past from Ducati, especially the 1098 Street Fighter from way back when, it was just very unforgiving. The engine was just so ornery and just angry all the time, and the handlebar had a weird bend to it. It made your wrists hurt, and if you weren't careful, you just cracked your crotch against the back of the tank all the time. It was just a really, like, kind of a nasty machine, and it was appropriate in some ways, but also it was uncomfortable. And the new Street Fighters are so much more polite, which I like, and I think there's still enough kind of raw performance in there to uphold the Street Fighter name, even though they're not as painful and awkward as they used to be. This is not a particularly good time to talk about fuel mileage, but it's maybe our only chance. My fuel mileage was in the mid 30s somewhere, mid to high 30s, depending on the type of riding, of course. It is a 4.5 gallon tank, so it's got enough fuel on board to have decent legs, but you're only ever really going to get decent mileage if you are kind of cruising in top gear at 55 to 65, which, again, if you're riding this bike, you probably don't want to be doing that. You want to be like rowing through the gearbox and whipping through some curves on a dynamic ride. And I think in that case, you're going to see mid-30s. Gosh, excuse me. You know, let's try wet riding mode, huh? Might as well, right? There we go. Now we're in wet riding mode, which makes sense because it's wet. And this softens the power delivery a little bit. And I suppose I appreciate a bike with this kind of performance has a mode like this, though I've been liking road mode. Sport is like, I wasn't in love with it. I like the high power output of the engine, but I don't really care for the sporty throttle response. I was liking road mode. And I suppose it's appropriate that we're in wet riding mode now, but you know, arguably one more mode than the bike needs, in my opinion. Though I appreciate the being spoiled for choice, you know. All right, well, all the praise that I've been heaping on the Street Fighter V2 comes to an end with the mirrors, because the mirrors are bad. They're in the wrong place. The shape is okay, but the left one especially is very vibey. I don't know why that is exactly, but it's super buzzy at speed, and the field of view isn't very good, and I can't get them to go high enough to see what I need to see. I don't like the mirrors. 2 out of 5 stars. I'm gonna go back to road riding mode. I like road. This road's my favorite. So that's what we're gonna do. Stop sign challenge in the wet, everybody. Put my foot down. Wow, this pavement is slippery. Happens when it first starts raining, you know? 0 miles an hour. Okay. Not maybe the most flattering footless stop we've ever done here on Daily Rider. So this isn't exactly the Street Fighter V2's forte, around town stuff like this. The steering lock isn't super wide. Yeah, the engine, like I said, wants to be spun up, but it's pretty good at this kind of thing simply because it just works well. The quick shifter is really good at low RPM. The clutch feels like, the clutch is a little grabby and it has kind of a narrow engagement zone, but it's predictable. The throttle response is good. It's a really interesting blend, in my opinion, this motorcycle, of kind of the optics of really raw performance and the kind of like lumpy idle and a little bit of a loud exhaust note, and it kind of sounds choppy and raw and visceral, and it feels that way to ride to a certain extent, but it's also relatively polite, which is great when you're riding a performance bike of any kind, but maybe arguably especially in the rain. Yeah, road mode's a ticket, man. Sport mode, I didn't like little power wheelies in sport mode. They're just like kind of a little bit herky-jerky. I didn't necessarily love it. Road mode's where it's at. Strong power, but a little bit milder delivery. All right, last stop sign here. What do we got? What do we got? What do we got? Come on, Street Fighter V2. Ah, I fudged it up. I fudged it up. It's a tall motorcycle. It's not designed for low speed maneuverability, so we're gonna cut it a little bit of slack, I think. I don't mind it around town. It's not great. There are better bikes, undoubtedly, but it was a little bit better than I was expecting. Okay, Lover's Lane. You ready to talk about passenger accommodations? My passenger test mule for the Street Fighter V2 was none other than Ari Henning, who got on the back of this bike so that we could go purchase a motorcycle for CTXP, and then the sale fell through and we had to ride back together as well. So we spent more time together on a Street Fighter V2 than I think either one of us wanted, especially him. He did say that it's a real high perch, and it's kind of nice because you can see, you know, you have a nice view from a tall passenger perch like that, but you're also a little bit vulnerable. Mostly he said the legroom is just terrible. There's not a lot of space between the foot pegs and the seat, so that's something that you're bound to struggle with, and you're going to want to trust the rider a little bit. He said the seat itself was a little more comfortable than he was expecting, but in general, passenger accommodations were very sport bikey, which is, you know, not an afterthought, but not the priority, let's say. All right, as we dip into the twisty road section, we're not going to be able to carry any kind of crazy lean angle on a day like this. And if you noticed in the intro the chicken strips on the tires, you will note that I did not flog this bike particularly hard at a racetrack or on a twisty road or anything like that, but I did experiment a little bit, and it's really quite an impressive bike when it comes to whipping through some corners. And that is down to its pedigree of being essentially a naked Panigale V2. And the Panigale V2 does not have ultra high spec suspension. It's not like it's got Öhlins fork and shock or anything like that. And for Ducati, it's kind of ho-hum equipment, but they're fully adjustable and they're set pretty stiff. And that's how I like my sport bikes, if I'm being honest. There are people that think this bike is on par with other sort of like general upright sporty-ish bikes in the motorcycling world, but it's not. It has much more pedigree when it comes to leaning over, and I would be very surprised if you got this bike and you either went to a twisty rotor racetrack and you were disappointed. And it almost doesn't matter how good a rider you are. I mean, for full-on, like, you know, expert level racers or professional racers, maybe they'd be a little bit underwhelmed, but anyone else is not gonna have a problem with the capability of this bike at all. Alrighty, not as sad as usual to say goodbye to the twisty road section of the Daily Rider route because it's so gosh darned wet. And back on to surface streets where we can continue talking about this sucker, not so much as a performance bike, but as a daily rider. Alright, yellow light, we can talk about brakes. Oh yeah, and we can engage the ABS, as you might expect in this type of weather. The brakes are good on this bike, like them a lot. Like I said, less aggressive pads, allegedly, than the Pani V2, but I think they're just still very, very typical Ducati brakes. Strong, confidence-inspiring, very, very, very good. I like them a lot. They're nice big Brembo calipers, and they're 320 millimeter discs. Cover up my shoe here. 320 rotors, which is that's big, in case you're not familiar. All right, this is a typically long light, so we can talk about the dash here a little bit. 4.3 inch TFT, as I mentioned before. It's starting to feel a little dated just because it's kind of small, and I know that like a bike like this, you don't want like a big screen here. That would be awkward and strange, so maybe it's fine. But it is one of the first things that occurred to me when I got on this bike, was like, huh, that's just not as kind of like big as I thought it would be. But I like the layout. It's fairly classy. I kind of like the analog tackle. It feels small, tucked into the corner like that. But yeah, all this like clock, temp gauge, ambient air temp, setting menu stuff, all it's pretty easy to access. The big thing it does not have is a fuel gauge. It just has a fuel light, which people have complained about in the past, and I kind of think they're right. As is typical with Ducati, in this setting menu here in the upper left, you can hold down the button and you can access these ride modes on the fly. And then if you tap setting menu, you can go into riding modes and you can adjust all of the parameters within all this stuff. Engine, you know, ABS, wheelie control, engine braking, all that stuff is adjustable in the menus, which is pretty cool. And oh geez, I stalled it. Oh gosh. It's pretty cool, and it's a thing that about Ducatis that I really like, that you're sort of encouraged to tweak the riding modes that come from the factory and make them what you want them to be, which is the way it should be, especially if you're going to pay $18,000 for a performance motorcycle. Am I right? I did want to address engine characteristic on this ride as well, because in the past I have been an outspoken critic of the Ducati Super Quattro style of building a twin really over square and high revving, and sure, you get a lot of power out of it, but you lose a lot of that kind of low-end grunt and mid-range, which I think is the kind of the best part of riding a V-twin. So I kind of miss that, and I definitely feel the same way about this engine to a certain extent, and I don't know that it's a reason to get the bike, but I have come to really appreciate and enjoy the 900 and something cc twins from Ducati, maybe especially the 937cc one that's from the Hyper and Desert X and Monster and so on and so forth, because it feels true to Ducati's history and true to the brand. You know, the V4 bikes are impressive. There's no doubt about it. They're incredible bikes. They're fast. They're high tech. They're great in many ways, but something about riding a Ducati and being on a twin just feels right to me. I don't know that the Street Fighter V2 is a better motorcycle than the Street Fighter V4. I mean, from an outright performance perspective, obviously it's, you know, slower. It's a little bit less sophisticated with the suspension and that kind of thing. But I don't know, it feels like the one that represents Ducati the most wholly. Does that make sense? Yeah. As for where this bike fits in motorcycling, it's not dumbed down in enough ways for me to consider it a completely different thing. It's not like an R1 going to an MT10 where they changed a lot of stuff. And yeah, it's an R1 engine kind of, but it doesn't necessarily feel like an R1. It feels more like a sport touring bike with an R1 engine in it, which is cool, but this really feels like a naked Panigale V2, and I like that about it. You have to make some sacrifices. It's not as practical. It's not as fuel efficient. It's not as comfortable. It's not as kind of like pleasant and easy to ride as some bikes might be, but it's raw and pure in a way that I really like, and it's comfortable enough depending on your daily ride, in my opinion. Now comes the part of the program where we ride this bike down a dirt road, and it's raining, and I have a bad feeling. I mean, when do we stop with this? Like, how do we... It's supposed to be like a dirt road. It's not supposed to be an enormous freaking lake. Let's go down the other side. It looks a little better on that side. Is that going to work? I don't know. Good question. But this could be an unmitigated disaster either way. So we're going to take a slightly different route this time. Suspension is stiff, as I said before. Definitely stiff. Traction control and ABS seem to be pretty well tuned for this kind of riding. Not even well tuned. They just work as they should, which is good, I suppose. I guess you know, I kind of owe it to you, the viewer, to let's just dive into the menu just for a second here. Okay, so we're in sport mode, and we'll turn traction control off, and we'll see. Oh, hang on, we got to go to actual sport mode. Rear ABS off, DTC off. Let's see how we do. Yep. Easy to spool it up. Pretty easy to spool it up. Okay. All right, everybody. Well, I think that was the right decision. I know you probably wanted to see me slog through the grass again and just absolutely decimate this bike, but I couldn't bring myself to do it, and I'm kind of glad that we just went down the dirt road. It's not a good dirt bike. The steering lock is very tight, as we'll learn in the U-turn challenge, and the suspension is stiff, and it has road tires on it, and it's a naked sport bike, for crying out loud. So I wouldn't take it down a dirt road if I were you, but you know, you can if you want to. All right, let's go back to road mode and head off on the last little bit of our ride here. So, can the Street Fighter V2 do a wheelie? You bet you can. And I just like revving it up. Oh my god, it's so good. It's so very good at that kind of thing. You can tell the bike doesn't necessarily want to wheelie. It has that sport bike thing that I've talked about with I don't know, Aprilia Tuono, or maybe even the other Street Fighter V4. It has a longish swing arm. It's made for mechanical grip. It's not made to stand up on its hind legs like that. It kind of, if anything, wants to drive forward, not to do a wheelie. But if you ask it to be bad, yeah, it'll do it. All right, here we go, everybody. Oh, I wouldn't. Oh man, I was gonna hoss on it, and then Johnny Dodge Ram pulled out in front of me. All right, last test of the day. Can you back it in? You can, because you can turn on sport mode. Oh boy, almost missed it. You can turn on, well, I put it in sport mode because I shut off rear ABS. So the point is you can shut off rear ABS if you want to. Another little whiff of performance thanks to Ducati. Is it the most responsible thing to do to leave people's ABS dreams in their own hands? I'm not sure it is, but I like it. And I always commend Ducati on it, and I will continue to do so. Hey, someone parked in our spot. What's that all about? Jeep, son of a bird. All right, U-turn challenge. We only have 2 parking spaces to work with, and I do not think that's going to be enough for the Street Fighter V2. So we're going to line up on the side of this little sedan here, and we're going to go like this. We're going to go full up. Jeez, I screwed up. Okay. We're going to go full lock left. Feet up, full lock left. Yeah, that's like, what is that, 2 1/3, 2 1/4? Not as bad as I thought, actually. You know, U-turns not exactly at the top of the priority sheet for the Street Fighter V2 engineers, I don't think. That stupid Jeep is in our parking spot, so we're going to go over here. And we're going to hop off this Mama Jamma. And are my legs a little bit hot? Yes, they are. And it's a cold, rainy day. So on a 90-degree humid day on your ride, perhaps you would also find your legs to be warm. I'm going to have to rinse it off. There's a lot of muck under there. And it's blowing steam off the exhaust. It's a hot-blooded little character, you know? It's a mean machine. No two ways about it. It's one that I really like a lot. And it speaks very much to my proclivities, I suppose, as a daily rider who likes a whiff of performance. It's a nice blend, as far as I'm concerned. Okie dokie, let's do some Instagram questions here, shall we? First one is from a Teddy Graham, who asks, in a world where the V4 Street Fighter and V2 Street Fighter were the same price, would the V2 still serve a purpose? Love this question. In other words, are they different enough? Is this one just a dumbed down version? And I addressed this a little bit, right? Because I like the V-twin thing. I like the twin cylinder Ducati thing, and I appreciate that it's simpler. And it's not like it's too simple. There's still loads of, you know, advanced electronics if you want to go to a racetrack. I feel like it's still true to form, but it's just a little bit simpler and arguably more pure because it's a twin and it's a Ducati. I don't know. Is that like old thinking? Am I just stuck in the past? I think it would serve a purpose, and I think I like how different it is. So yeah, I think so, Teddy Graham. The next question is from B1 Pig, who asks, if there was a 2-bike garage, only 2 bikes, which other bike would make a great complement to this one? Really like this question too. And this totally depends, right? I mean, maybe a scooter, so you could like bop around because you live in a urban environment. I don't know. For me, it would probably be something road trippy or adventurous, like maybe a Yamaha Tenere 700, maybe a BMW GS, maybe a Kawasaki Versys, something like that, you know? Something that has like luggage and is more comfortable. Passenger accommodations, has longer legs, maybe has a little bit of dirt, or, you know, off-road capability. But I think, you know, this bike with a, say like a, Yamaha T7, whew, that would be a mean garage. Mean garage. I like that question a lot. It depends on the person, but great question. Good food for thought. Next question is from Cooter Rocks, who says, how many trips to work can you do before needing a service appointment? Yeah, Ducati's got a real reputation for being high maintenance, but the bikes these days aren't so bad. I think this is 15,000 miles valve check and 7,500 mile minor services. And, you know, if your Ducati dealer charges an arm and a leg for hourly service, then, yeah, it's going to be expensive. But, I mean, 15,000 mile valve check, same as a Ninja 400, basically. I think a Ninja 400 16,000 maybe. The point is, it's not an issue aside from any issue that you might have with your local Ducati dealer, which is between you and them and doesn't involve me as far as I'm concerned. Next question is from Ghost on Two Wheels, who asks, how much Ducati tax are you paying for versus the actual performance and daily rider capability? For the same money, you could get both a Kawasaki Z900 and a Yamaha MT-09. Fair enough. Again, comparing this bike to an MT-09 or a Z900 is not reasonable, in my opinion. This bike arguably compares more closely to a Japanese kind of hyper naked than or super naked than it does to a mid-size bike. I mean, an MT-09 compared to this on a racetrack, well, I mean, it would just not even be close. An MT-09 can't keep up with this bike, even the SP, not even close. Not in a drag race, not in it. This bike's got more power, it's got more sophistication, it's got better suspension, it's way more performance. So how much Ducati tax are you paying? It depends how you want to couch it, but you're paying a performance tax. You're getting a lot more than you get with those bikes. If all you want to do is ride across town to work and you just want to pop a wheelie here and there and cruise down some twisty roads and you're not like an ultra advanced rider, then yeah, it's maybe not worth it to get this bike because it's a sharper blade than most people need, to be honest. I don't think it's comparable to those bikes particularly. And if it is to you, then yeah, just get the one that doesn't cost as much money, I suppose. Next question is from OneQuick26, who says, styling aside, you can only pick one for a cross-country trip, Suzuki SV650 or this Ducati. I think even if the price was the same, I'd be tempted by this, but it doesn't. An SV is just sort of like more reasonable and more accommodating and ultimately probably more comfortable to do something like that. Though this bike fits me a little bit better than the SV does, you gotta go SV. That's what I'm going. Okay, last question here is from Matteo Zorloni, who says, does it give the raw, visceral vibes of the old 1098 Street Fighter, or is it following the trend of modern sport bikes where most of the fun is filtered through well-developed electronics? I think this question is interesting because the suggestion here, I think, is that when a bike has a lot of electronics on it, when it has lean angle controlled ABS and wheelie control and engine brake control and 3 different throttle maps and 3 different ride modes and and an IMU and all that stuff, that you're not getting the true bike. You're not feeling the actual bike underneath you. You can't be in touch with the machine. But I think that's something that Ducati has done pretty well, actually. Whether it's the Desert X or this bike or even the V4, especially the V4 Street Fighter, to be honest. The V4 Street Fighter is like kind of like it sputters and crackles and it kind of like sounds like a really highly tuned vicious bike, and in some ways it is, but in other ways it's very easy to use. I like the combination that Ducati seems to be reaching for lately, where the goal seems to be make it feel raw and powerful and pure when you ask it to, and back that up with some electronics. If electronics are doing the right thing, if they're working properly, which I believe they do on this bike, they don't get in the way of anything that you want to do. They're not going to keep you from leaning over. They're not going to keep you from opening the throttle. They're not going to keep you from getting on the brakes. They're only going to save your bacon when it matters. And that's what good electronics should do, and that's what the electronics on this bike do. And I think it's both. There's a lot of electronics on there, more than I would probably choose to have, if I'm being honest, but the bike is there to be felt, and it's accessible, and I love that, even in the rain. On a wet day, a wet commute across Los Angeles, it was a really fun partner in crime. Not crime, sorry, partner in fun. There we go. Okay, stick with me, everybody. Let's put the sucker on the Daily Rider leaderboard, shall we? All right, everybody, here we are, inside, out of the rain, and I'm feeling better already. Ducati Street Fighter V2, ready to go on the 2023 leaderboard. As a friendly reminder, you got your Suzuki SV650, top of the list there. Followed by Ninja 400 and the Busa. Before we place the Street Fighter V2, Ducati Street Fighter V4, we can go back to the 2021 leaderboard here. You can see that it's got a little $ and a fire emoji. Bit pricey and spicy, as we say. And I wanted to point out where the Street Fighter V4 was in the context of this, sort of, what is that, 55, 60th percentile, maybe something like that? Mid-pack somewhere. I wanted to point that out for a couple reasons, not least of which is that the Street Fighter V2 was very close to getting some emojis. You can see the SV650 and Ninja 400 have smiley faces, CBR 1000, RRSP's got a $ because it's expensive. The Street Fighter V2 was close to getting all of those, I think. $18,000 is a lot of money to pay for a quote-unquote mid-sized naked bike, but the performance is there, the technology is there, the everything is there. So normally the threshold for a $ is 20 grand, and it's under 20 grand, and I don't think it's quite fair. It almost gets a fire emoji for being fast, because it is fast. It's kicking the pants. But for some reason, I don't know, it doesn't feel overwhelming and worthy of the sticker, I don't think. And that's not an insult in the bike at all. I love the amount of power that it has. It makes so much sense for the street, or makes more sense for the street than some other bikes that are faster. And yeah, the smile emoji also. I mean, the giggle factor is high on that bike, but maybe because it feels so kind of purposeful and serious, it doesn't feel like it's such a smiley kind of bike. I don't know. So it was close to getting some of these delineations, but in the end, holding off on all of it. Okay, where was I? What were we talking about? Where does this bike go? Is it better than a Suzuki Hayabusa on the daily ride? Yeah, I think so. More comfortable. Almost the same price. Busa is a little more expensive and faster, but like faster in a way that, come on, who really cares? But yeah, I think the V2 is more comfortable. Is it better than an SV650? Is it going to the top of the leaderboard? That's so tough. I would have it before a Suzuki SV650.
but would I recommend it? Like, is it actually a better bike? Is it easier? Is it more comfortable? Is it better as a daily rider? No, I don't think so. That SV is awfully good. Is it better than Ninja 400? I think so, yeah. It's better than Ninja 400 because I think it's similarly comfortable and just offers so much more performance and whatnot. That was a tough call. SV650, is it better than a Street Fighter V2? Is it really, Zach? Well, I already put the magnet up there, too late, okay. Whatever. A really, really excellent bike, and one that resonates with me a lot. So my personal bike is the KTM 950 Supermoto from 2006. You can see it's over here on the Daily Rider Classics board. The Street Fighter V2 reminds me a lot of that KTM 950 Supermoto that I have. It's you know, it's tall. It's a little bit uncompromising in some ways. The performance is very, you know, it's right there, and it really, I think, is more geared toward experienced and advanced riders. And it's a little bit unapologetic in what it is. You know, I like that about the Street Fighter V2. It's kind of gnarly. I see a little bit of my own garage, you might say, in the Street Fighter V2 that I'm gazing at over here in the garage. A lot of fun on that bike. I do hope that you enjoyed that daily ride. I hope you stayed dry as I did. And I hope you'll ride safe, and we'll see you again on Daily Rider. See you, everybody.
I wonder if we can get the sucker to spin up here on the bridge. It's all wet. Yep. Not on the metal grate though. We'll take it easy on the metal grate. I'm gonna open up my little chin vent. You might get a little bit of a whistle, but I need some ventilation in here. It's stuffy going slow.